Hello, everyone. Colin here. Welcome to another episode of the Colin on Culture podcast entitled Toxic Culture and UFOs. Now, for any conspiracy theorists on the call, you're probably thinking, I've heard about this guy. He really does his research. He knows what he's talking about. Finally, some proof that UFOs exist. Yeah, it's not that. It's not that kind of podcast. This is not about toxic culture in the military, although I could do a podcast about that, given the recent allegations. I'm not going to do that. No, this is about the fact that in almost all cases of toxic culture where there have been independent reports into those cultures, the first response from senior leaders has typically been to deny the existence at all of toxic culture, or to pretend that what's obvious to everybody else isn't obvious to them. So why UFO links? Because every time somebody sees something that can't be explained, well, not just one person, but like multiple people see something that can't be explained, there's a standard response. There's a stock response that is, it's military tests, it's a new plane, it's a weather balloon. That's always a good one. What did US Congress call them recently? Unidentified anomalous phenomena, which just rolls off the tongue. Essentially, what they're saying is, what they're doing is gaslighting the people that dared to report the fact that they saw something that they couldn't really explain. But by their very nature, an unidentified flying object has become, by default, alien. When the reality is what they are reporting is an unidentified flying object. It's only recently, this is turning into a conspiracy theorist podcast, until recently, the military, particularly the US military, denied all existence of any kind of unidentified anything. And it's only recently that they've gone, you know what? We said that there's definitely not UFOs. Well, there's these silver orbs that are floating through the sky, and we've had fighter pilots chasing them and they lose them. So yeah, apart from them, there's no alien life form. But just to go back to what I'm actually talking about, is the fact that senior leaders take the same approach when it comes to any kind of cultural issues, especially if it's emanating from the top of the organization. Nothing to see here, nothing to see here. No, you're in the wrong. No, that's the way that we behave. That is a demonstration of our values. That is what they're doing. Oh, that's collaboration done properly. You know what your problem is? You're just too touchy. And these things ring a bell? You read about them all the time. So I've got some very real examples, which are taken from Detox Your Culture. If you haven't got a copy, it's available in all good bookshops and some rubbish ones too. The first one is the review into the Met Police, Baroness Casey review. She said there's a tendency to underplay and deny problems, to brush them under the carpet, and to tolerate unacceptable behaviours in ways that fall far short of public expectations, right? So to tolerate, to go, yeah, that is the way that we do things. It's fine. There was a report into the culture at the University of Prince Edward Island, and the premier of Prince Edward Island, that's how far up it went. He said that not only had the university failed to cultivate an environment of respect and inclusion, but they contributed to it or were aware of toxic and problematic behaviour and chose to do nothing about it. Fire and rescue services was another investigation. There is an element of mismanagement. They turned a blind eye or just don't look at the truth. And then the last one, I've got one here, a recent one from a broadcast company who they'd single out employees and belittle them until they took no further part in the culture or would resign. And they were routinely shamed, gaslighted, and intimidated. So whenever we get these allegations, there is this immediate response and of course it really depends on the organization. Actually, that's not true. It really depends on the leadership of the organization. Someone asked me, I did an interview recently, and someone asked me to talk about the best HR department that I'd ever worked with. And so I shared the best HR department I ever worked with and said that what made them the best was the autonomy they received from the chief executive. the chief executive wasn't one of those people that just said, we want values, we're doing culture. Like, he's fully invested. I worked with them on a culture program over 2 years, and he was the owner of it. And he was the mouthpiece of it. We did videos, he wrote blogs, he did so many things out of his comfort zone. But he said to the head of HR, he said, you're responsible for making sure that we educate people on culture. You're responsible for creating an environment where people can talk openly about the things that they see and the things that they do, both from a positive and a negative. So the head of HR really became the custodian of all the work that the organization was doing. But crucially, obviously, the head of HR was the person that instituted the learning and development programs to make sure that people had the skills to be able to do what needed to be done in order to uphold this culture. And so that's, for me, that's what's required in order that we just don't immediately gaslight employees. And of course, it doesn't always start out that way. I want to acknowledge that there are times when there's an element of disbelief. I've seen a couple of good cultures turn rotten. And you may have even worked in one yourself when you're listening to this. You're like, yeah, our culture was really good, and then it just went really bad. It is sometimes just somebody out of the blue just behaves just really, really poorly, and then they try to explain it away and make excuses. And of course, there's never an excuse for undermining the safety. And so what happens is that generates a what I call a combatant culture, and I go to great lengths in Culture Fix and Detox Your Culture talking about kind of what leads organizations to get to this point where they've got this combatant culture. When they kind of wait for that person or that group of people to change their behaviors, it becomes consistently combatant. So it was combatant, and everyone was just like, oh, hopefully this is just a phase. Hopefully this will just pass. But if we don't do anything about it, if we don't take any action, then it becomes consistently combatant. And then you're on the bottom rung of the 3-rung toxic culture ladder. So that's the first rung, consistently combatant. If we don't do anything, if we just wait for it to change itself, it becomes corrosive. So at this point, we're starting to see sick days. We're starting to see people talk about it outside of their immediate group. When it's consistently combatant, people are like, oh, I hope this changes soon. This can't go on forever, can it? Why doesn't anyone do something about that behavior? By the time you get to corrosive, which is the second rung on the toxic culture ladder, you're at the point where people are openly saying somebody needs to do something about this. Are you going to report? I'm going to report it. Oh, but if we report it, then there's the fear of what can happen. There's blame apportionment. There's finger pointing. Also, we know that they're just going to gaslight us anyway because they haven't done anything so far. 1 or 2 people have reported it. And on that second rung, the media is starting to get a little bit of leakage, so people are kind of publicly talking about things. And then, of course, by the time you get to harmful, the people on the receiving end of the behavior, their lives are just made hell because nobody did anything about it. And at that point, that's when the response comes. Until then, it's nothing to see here. Oh, it will answer itself. That UFO thing. Oh, it will answer itself. Oh, it'll become clear in the fullness of time. Yeah, that's another good one. Oh, we just need to ride this period out of uncertainty. Yeah, we're not sure either, but it will pass. That real, real nothing to see here. And by the time you get to harmful, of course, it's harmful not only to the individuals, but also to the reputation of the organization, also to its results as well. And also, by the time you get to that point, so there's a complete undermining of trust. So if you're a manager, if you're a business leader, if you're an employee, and I'll come to employees' responsibilities in a second, because the tendency is, oh, if I report this, they're just going to say it's a weather balloon, right? And, we've all seen those things in the sky where you're a bit like, what is that? There's probably an easy explanation, but should I report it? So by the time you get to that point where there's this kind of this consistent denial of information, there's a real undermining of trust within the culture. You don't know who to trust anymore. You don't know what to trust. You don't know what information is real and what's not real. There's a sense of confusion, I think, as well, where it's like, hang on a minute. and this comes back to another conversation I had at the end of life about who HR reports to. They're like, does HR report to the CEO? Is HR there to protect the reputation of the organization or the well-being of staff? I mean, every HR department's different. From my perspective, it's both, weighted towards the second one, to be perfectly honest with you. So there's an undermining of trust. There's a real lack of accountability. So, it contributes to an environment where people's concerns just aren't taken seriously. And that then leads, obviously, to a poor culture. You see people kind of getting away with stuff, nothing really happens, or questions go unanswered about why this and not that. There's punishment or belittlement, as we found in one of the case studies for speaking up, where people are just routinely gaslighted. That's the next one, where we dismiss people's concern. That happened in the Met Police. There was one policeman said, we were encouraged to talk, but what's the point if you're just going to be stonewalled, fobbed off, or your concern is going to be put in the too difficult pile? And of course, all of that just leads to a normalizing of unacceptable behavior, where people are like, oh, this is the way that we're behaving now. This is okay. That's what we do now, is it? And then other people start behaving in that way. And you're seeing this play out quite prominently across the pond in the US at the minute, where it's like, oh, well, he's behaving like that, so I can too. Yeah, maybe ask yourself if that's the right thing to do, maybe. And of course, negative media coverage comes with consistently gaslighting people. And at that stage, people are leaving. The people that you actually need to help you change stuff, they're leaving. So you get this increased attrition. So what do organizations need to do? Well, it's not enough to dismiss concerns. There needs to be a curiosity when it comes to, and I use that relatively loosely. If someone makes complaints, it's like, oh, let's sit and be curious for a while. No, there has to be, okay, well, what could be happening here? Also, ask yourself this question, and this is why toxic culture is every organization's biggest risk, is what's the impact on results? Well, it's huge. What's the impact on our reputation? Even bigger, especially if you're in the leadership team, because there's a good chance you'll lose your job if the toxic culture hits the media. What's the risk of us keeping hold of our best people? What's the risk of hiring new ones? All of these kind of things. So what could be happening? What questions can we ask? Who can we ask of them? What do we need to take into consideration? And definitely not positioning hierarchy. I mean, what things could be happening in that person's personal life or otherwise that could be affecting the way that they're behaving right now. But it's not enough, for senior leaders. It's not enough just to have a nothing to see here culture or dismiss concerns out of hand. They've got to build a culture for staff where it's safe to speak up. And I did a podcast. I was on somebody else's podcast last week and talked about whistleblowing and why that's really good for cultures. And the person said, well, surely if there's a good culture, then there's no need for it to be anonymous. I'm like, I completely 100% agree. But more often than not, it's not a good culture. And people fear reprisals. They do. They fear for their jobs. If this gets reported and my name's attached to it, and that speaks to the kind of culture that you have. So I think, build the culture where it's safe to speak up. If there are any allegations, what you want to do is to kind of escalate them. So if you're a member of staff, if you see something, if you hear something, then you have a responsibility to report it in whichever way that you can. If you're a leader, you want to investigate any allegations. You want to do it independently. And so the reports that I read from were all independently done, which is why they were so honest. Whether that means that anything will happen, of course, is a completely different matter. Although I will say that so Mark Rowley, who's the chief constable of the Met Police, I think that's his title, or commissioner. I'm sorry if he's listening. I'm sorry for getting his title wrong. They have made some progress, but their hands are tied a little bit, particularly with regards to firing people who are persistent offenders. But they have made some progress, definitely. I think doing pulse checks regularly on the culture, asking for feedback, Yeah, I've got about half a dozen organizations, people in half a dozen who regularly do my culture survey. So that's fiveculturesquiz.com to ascertain where they're at right now. So I think that's, it's a good thing. Where do we feel that we are right now? And the report that we send them gives them some actions that they can take. There needs to be a well-written risk management plan around toxic culture, just like UFOs. If it gets to the point where we finally, meet our alien friends, and let's be honest, something must be out there in this big, wide universe. Going back to the conspiracy theory, there must be, right? And if when something happens, there must be a plan. There's got to be a plan. Here's what we say. Here's what we do. We come in peace and all of this kind of stuff. What's the plan for a toxic culture? And also to have a crisis communications expert ready to go, so that from a staffing perspective, leaders send the message that we take this seriously, even though you're not quite sure how to explain what you've seen, what you've heard, you're uncomfortable with the feeling, maybe it's keeping you awake at night. We're on your side. We're not just going to say that what you've seen and what you've heard didn't happen. We're not going to pretend that it's just going to immediately go away. We're on your side. A lot of organizations talk about this concept of one team. And one team means taking each other seriously all of the time, regardless of hierarchy. As soon as organizations feel that it's unsafe to speak up, then leaders won't hear the things that they need to hear in order to run their business efficiently. And, I call this a layer of tar, where the executive pass things down and employees pass things up. And in the middle is this kind of middle management layer where everything just gets stuck. And often it's a fear to escalate. It's a fear to pass things down. But the crisis communication expert can really advise, this is what we need to say. This is how we need to say it. This is the work that we need to do, working closely with an independent organization who isn't a friend of the CEO or anybody like that. It's completely independent, so that we can either validate what people have seen and heard and provide a definitive, this is what we found and this is how it answers those concerns. Or it sends a message to those people who have perpetrated, say, we're coming for you. We're not prepared to tolerate. We're not prepared to sit back. We're coming for you. We're going to make sure that we investigate this thoroughly. We'll kind of uncover everything to make sure that we can provide a report that says exactly what happened, by when, and remove that layer of doubt. And to give people the confidence that they are on one team and we're moving forward together. Okay. Hope you've enjoyed today's Colin on Culture podcast. Ta-ra for now.